Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the first maṅgalam verse of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. But before talking about that, I'll just briefly talk about the Pāyiram, which is the introductory verse written by Murugan. This is important because it explains the context in which Bhagavan composed uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. I'll first explain the context and then read the maṅgalam. That is, Bhagavan, from time to time, had written various verses which were instructive in nature, and Murugan had collected these together, and I think there are about 21 of them. I can't remember exactly. So in July 1928, he asked Bhagavan to compose more verses on the subject of the nature of reality and the means to attain it. So Bhagavan started composing, and as Bhagavan was composing, of the old collection, Murugan removed almost all the verses. I think only one or two of the earlier verses remained unchanged, and one of them was changed, and all the other verses were new verses. So the context in which Murugan asked Bhagavan to compose these verses, I mean, what Murugan asked Bhagavan was to reveal the nature of reality and the means of attaining it. That is what he writes in this Pāyiram. The Pāyiram is Meyin ilbum adu mevaṉ tiranum emaku viyampadi Murugan oduha ena poi ullahin kallam arum artral gana ramanan katturai tan uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu uvaṇdu. What that means is, when Murugan asked, so that we may be saved, reveal to us the nature of reality and the means by which to attain it, the noble Ramana, because he is free from the delusion of the unreal world, joyfully and with certainty composed uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So as I say, what's important here, or what's most important here, is that the subject matter of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is the nature of reality and the means of to attain it. That is why it is called uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Uḷḷadu is a Tamil word that means what is or what exists. And Nāṛpadu means 40, because there are 40 verses, plus 2 maṅgalam verses. So that's why it's called uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Though he asked to reveal the nature of reality and the means to attain it, the main subject matter of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is the means to attain it, because relatively little can be said about the nature of reality. What is important, in order to know the nature of reality, we have to attain it. We cannot know the nature of reality by our mind. So there are verses where Bhagavan is indicating the nature of reality. For example, in the very first verse of the text, he says, in the last sentence of the first verse of the text, he says, Nama uru chittiramum papanum sapadamum olium attaneyam tanam evaṉ. That means the picture of names and forms. That means this entire world, not only the world of physical phenomena, but also the internal world of mental phenomena, all names and forms. The one who sees, namely ego, the cohesive screen, that's a screen on which all this is seen, the pervading light, the light by which all this is seen, attaneyam tanam evaṉ. All these are he who is oneself. So here Bhagavan, and he here refers to what he said in the first sentence is or muḍl, that one fundamental that has a power to become many. All these are only he, and he is oneself. So here Bhagavan is pointing out that the reality is our own real nature. What we actually are is the reality. That's what he indicates here. And for example, in the 7th verse, he says, here he uses the word arivu, which means awareness, but he's using it not to refer to the pure awareness, but the awareness that rises and subsides. In other words, the awareness that sees the world, namely ego or mind. So what he says in this verse is, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. And as I say, awareness here means ego or mind, because that is, the world appears only in the view of ego or mind. So without ego or mind, there would be no knowledge of the world. So that's why he said the world shines by awareness. So what this implies is, though the world, which means all phenomena, and awareness, which means ego, rise and subside simultaneously, it's only by the ego that the world, that all phenomena appear, because all phenomena are objects. The objects appear only in the view of the subject. And then he goes on to say in the second half of that verse, only that which shines without appearing and disappearing, as the eṉum. Eṉum means the place or space or location or the site or the ground for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness, is the substance, which is the whole. The word he uses here for substance is poruḻ. Poruḻ means it's a Tamil equivalent of the Sanskrit word vastu. It means substance in the sense of the ultimate substance, at least in this context it means. So what actually exists, that is one of the important distinctions made in Advaita philosophy and by Bhagavan, is a distinction between substance and form. For example, Bhagavan uses the analogy in verse 13 of gold and gold ornaments. But Bhagavan said the gold ornaments are unreal. They do not exist as other than gold. Why does he say which is real? Why does he say the ornaments are unreal and the gold is real? Of course, gold isn't ultimately real, but as far as the analogy is concerned, this is to illustrate the distinction between the reality and the appearances. All forms are appearances. That is, gold ornaments have no existence of their own. They derive their existence only from the existence of gold. So without gold, there are no gold ornaments. So the gold ornaments are nothing but gold. So what actually exists is the substance. The forms are just incidental. So the forms, because they appear and disappear, they're unreal. The substance is real. Of course, gold is also a form, so ultimately it's unreal, but just because it's used there as, Bhagavan uses it there as an analogy to point out the distinction between substance and form. What is real is the substance, not the forms, because the forms have no existence apart from the substance. If there was no gold, there could be no gold ornaments. Likewise, if so what Bhagavan refers to here in verse 7 as poruḻ is that substance, the ultimate substance, what actually exists. So what is it that actually exists? It is only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the place for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness. So that is the ground, the ultimate substance, what underlies all this appearance. And that substance is pūṇram. Pūṇram is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word purna, which means the whole. So the totality of all that is. So what actually exists is only that substance, and nothing other than that substance exists, because it is the substance that appears as everything. But it never actually appears or disappears. The names and forms, the ego and phenomena, they appear, but though their substance is that one poruḻ, that poruḻ actually never becomes anything. It always remains as it is. That's why Bhagavan says that it shines without appearing or disappearing. That implies that it always remains as it is, and that the world and ego appear and disappear in it without ever affecting it. So the reason I've referred to these verses is just to illustrate that Bhagavan is referring to, it does tell us something about the nature of reality. The nature of reality is ourself. It is that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing. There's a very important word here. He says it is that which shines. Olirum means shine, and aktē means that which shines. This is a very important word here, because when he says it shines, it implies it is always known. So what is this reality? He doesn't say it here, but as he's explained elsewhere, that which is always shining in our heart. So that is the substance, that is the reality, and that is the infinite whole. So in this way, in so many verses, he gives us pointers to the nature of reality. In another, I'll just take one more example. In verse 27, he says, the state in which nanudiada uḻḷanilai, namadubai uḻḷanilai. The state in which one exists without rising as I is the state in which we exist as that. That here refers to that, it refers to Brahman, which is that poruḻ, that vastu, that he referred to in verse 7. So in order to be what we actually are, which is that vastu, we need to remain without rising as ego. So again, these are indirect pointers to the nature of reality. It's the state in which there is no rising of ego and consequently no rising of anything else. It is the state of just pure being. So Bhagavan is here and there indirectly pointing to the nature of reality. But the main theme running throughout Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is the practice. That is what Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the main purpose of the text. It's not just there is a lot of very deep philosophy in it, but it's not philosophy just for the sake of philosophy. It's philosophy for the sake of showing us how to experience that which we really are, how to experience that reality, how to experience the nature of reality. We can experience it only by being it. That is the implication of so many verses. So it is the means of attaining it. This is what the main emphasis in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is. For example, in this verse 27 that I was just referring to, after saying that the state in which one exists without rising as I is the state in which we exist as that, he then goes on to clearly indicate what is the means of experiencing that. He says, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. The place where I rises is only that poruḻ, only that ultimate substance. What is that ultimate substance? It is I am. It is our own fundamental awareness of our own existence. So that is what we need to investigate. If we investigate that source from which I rises, that is, the I that rises is ego. The source or the place from which it rises is only ourself as the fundamental awareness I am, the pure awareness I am. So that is what we need to investigate. So though he says this in this is a rhetorical question, the implication of this rhetorical question, that is, the rhetorical question is, without investigating the place where I rises, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise. What that implies is that we cannot reach the annihilation of ourselves. In other words, we cannot attain annihilation of ego, the state in which I does not rise, without investigating the place where I rises. In other words, without investigating ourselves. So throughout uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan is emphasizing the practice. And in the very first maṅgalam verse, it is all about practice. That is, generally people have an idea about Brahman, and they think that we need to meditate on Brahman. So how to meditate on Brahman? That is basically the question that Bhagavan is addressing in this first maṅgalam verse. So now, as I say, now I've come to the main topic that I'm to talk about today, which is this first maṅgalam verse. I will give a bit of context, because if we understand the context of this verse, it will throw more light on it. That is, when, as I say, in July and August, just within about 3 weeks, Bhagavan composed almost all of these verses, and he and Murugan discussed, and they arranged them in order, and Murugan was often suggesting if one more verse could be fit in here, it will create a link between this verse and this verse. So it was a very well thought out composition. And though all the verses were composed by Bhagavan, Bhagavan and Murugan were working together collaboratively on this. That Murugan was making suggestions, arranging in order, and that's how it took its shape. But after about 3 weeks, Bhagavan had completed. There were 40 verses in the main text and one maṅgalam verse. The maṅgalam verse was just a 2-line verse, what is called a kurulvemba. That is the first 2 lines of this first maṅgalam verse. So that's how it was. And Murugan and Bhagavan felt it was completed. But some followers of Kavyaganta, who happened to be there at that time, told him about this, but Bhagavan has been composing this work. So Kavyaganta asked if he could have a look at it. So Bhagavan showed him. And Kavyaganta, his mother tongue was Telugu, but he had lived some time in Tamil Nadu, so he could understand spoken Tamil, and he could read Tamil. So he was able to read, but he didn't have a very deep knowledge. He couldn't very clearly understand what it was about, but he read it, and he noticed that the maṅgalam verse was just 2 lines, whereas all the other verses were 4 lines. He felt this isn't appropriate, so he asked Bhagavan, why is the maṅgalam only 2 lines, where all the other verses are 4 lines? Shouldn't it also be a 4-line verse? So Bhagavan and Murugan looked at each other and they discussed them, and Bhagavan said, okay, I'll add another 2 lines at the beginning. So Bhagavan then composed the first 2 lines. Then the next objection raised by Kavyaganta is, but this is a maṅgalam verse that makes no mention of God at all. A maṅgalam verse maṅgalam means it's an auspicious introduction. So it's generally in any maṅgalam verse, there'll be a mention of God. But it's like a prayer or beseeching God, or it's at least a reference to God should be there, or it should be a dhyana sloka, a verse of meditation on God. But here was a verse with no mention of God at all. So he asked, how is this appropriate as a maṅgalam verse? Shouldn't there be shouldn't God be mentioned in the maṅgalam verse? And then he looked through all the other verses, and he found only one verse but mentioned the name of God. That is the verse that is now the second maṅgalam verse, but it contains the word Maheshwara, which is the name of Shiva. Maheshwara simply means the great Lord, but it's a very commonly used name of Shiva. So he thought, this is a suitable verse to have as a maṅgalam. So he told Bhagavan, wouldn't this be more appropriate as a maṅgalam verse? Bhagavan and Murugan knew very well why they had this first Mangalam verse, and it was how appropriate it was to the whole context of, to the whole subject matter of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. But to satisfy Kaviyaganta, Bhagavan and Murugan had discussed the idea, and then they thought, yes, okay, this first Mangalam verse is very explicitly about the practice of self-investigation, atma-vichara. Whereas the other verse that Kaviyaganta referred to, it is indirectly referring to surrender. So since Bhagavan sometimes used to say, but vichara and surrender, self-investigation and self-surrender are the only two means by which we can know ourselves as we actually are, they said, okay, we can have this Maheshwar verse as a second Mangalam verse. And of course, though Bhagavan sometimes used to say, but there are two ways, either investigate who you are or surrender yourself. He made it so clear, he made it clear in so many other places, but actually, how to surrender ourselves? We can surrender ourselves completely only by investigating ourselves. As he says, for example, as he clearly implies, for example, in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nana. So this is how there came to be, how this verse came to be 4 lines, and how there came to be a second Mangalam verse. And then Bhagavan composed one more verse to make up the 40 again. So that background is just to give a bit of context, which is relevant to this verse, because if we understand that what Bhagavan first wrote was only the last 2 lines of this verse, and that the first 2 lines were added by way of explanation of the question that he asked in the second 2 lines, in the last 2 lines. That is what the last 2 lines are: uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva, uḻḷattē, uḻllapaḍi, uḻḷadē, uḻllal-aṟa. What that means is, it starts with a question. uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva. uḻḷaporuḻ, poruḻ means, as I explained earlier, poruḻ means it's a Tamil equivalent of the Sanskrit word vastu. It means the ultimate substance, that which actually exists. And uḻḷaporuḻ means the existing substance, or the real substance, or the actual substance. Uḻḷa is an adjectival participle. So uḻḷaporuḻ means, basically means sat vastu, the existing substance, and that's how I've translated it, the existing substance. So uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva. Ullal is a verb that means thinking. So literally, this uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva, evaṉ can mean how to. It can also mean who can. So the basic meaning of the question is how or who, meditating on the or thinking of the existing substance. That implies who can or how to meditate on this existing substance. The main meaning here for evaṉ is how to, because that fits with the answer, because though evaṉ can also mean who can, I mean, that's also an appropriate question. Who can meditate on the reality? But the primary meaning of evaṉ in this context is how to meditate on reality. Or ullal simply means to think, but it implies meditation. So in other words, what Bhagavan is question he's asking here is how to meditate on Brahman, how to do Brahma Dhyana. And he then answers this question very beautifully. uḻḷattē, uḻḷapaḍi, uḻḷadē, uḻḷal. uḻḷattē means in the heart. uḻḷapaḍi means as it is. uḻḷadē is an intensified form of uḻḷadu. uḻḷadu depending on how it fits in the sentence. As I said, uḻḷadu, one meaning of uḻḷadu is what exists, what is. Here, uḻḷadu is a participial noun, meaning existing or being. So being in the heart as it is, the uḻḷadē, the A is an intensifier. So that implies only being in the heart as it is uḻḷal, is meditating, is thinking. Literally, uḻḷal simply means thinking. Here it implies meditating. Meditating on what? Meditating on uḻḷaporuḻ. In other words, we can meditate on what actually exists, what we actually are, only by being in the heart as it is. In other words, by being as we are. So how to be as we are, that is made clear in so many later verses of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. We rise and stand as ego by attending to things other than ourselves. So in order to be as we actually are, we need to attend to ourselves alone, because when we attend to ourselves, ego thereby subsides and we remain as we actually are. So it's only by means of self-attentiveness but we can be in the heart as it is. And being in the heart as it is alone is the correct meditation on Brahman. We can know Brahman, or we can meditate on Brahman only by being as it is. uḷḷapaḍi. uḻḷapaḍi is a beautiful word in Tamil, meaning as it is. As it is means as that uḻḷaporuḻ is. And that uḻḷaporuḻ is nothing but ourselves, what we actually are. So this is the verse. Oh, and then it ends with the final word, uṇar, no. In this context, no can be taken to mean, it can be taken to mean no, but this is the case. But a more appropriate meaning to take here is know that reality, implying knowing it by being as it is. Yes, so this was the original verse. And then when Kavyaganta suggested it should be a 4-line verse, in order to clarify the question, to make, to give more force to the question. I mean, why does Bhagavan ask how to meditate on reality? We just think of Brahman. Isn't that sufficient, we may think. But why can we not think of Brahman, truly think of Brahman? We can think of the idea of Brahman, but Brahman is not the idea of Brahman. All we know about Brahman is we have a certain idea about Brahman. We don't know Brahman as it is, because Brahman is nothing but ourselves. Tattvamasi, you are that. But now we are not aware of ourselves as Brahman. We're aware of ourselves as I am this person, I am Michael, I am this body. So we are not aware of us, because we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. We are not aware of Brahman. So how can we meditate on Brahman when we are not, when we do not know Brahman? We can meditate on it only by being it, and we can be it only by attending to ourselves. Well, he doesn't mention attending to ourselves here, but that is implied. So to clarify this question, he added these first 2 lines. The first 2 lines, it begins with another rhetorical question, and then the rhetorical question that begins the 2-line verse, he expands on that, making it into a longer sentence, adding more to it. So the verse in the final form, after Bhagavan added the first 2 lines, the verse is uḻḷadala, uḻḷadala-duḻḷavuṇarvu, uḻḷadō, uḻllaporuḻ, uḻllalaṟa, uḻllattē, uḻḷadāl, luḻḻameṉum, uḻllaporuḻ, uḻllalevaṉ, uḻḷattē, uḻllapaḍi, uḻḷadē, uḻḷal-aṟa. As you can see, most of this syllable ul is repeated here many times. Ul is the root of a tenseless verse verb, a tenseless verb, but means to be or to exist. So that is one sense in which uḻ is used. So from that root uḻ is derived, well, that is a verbal root. So there are various forms of a verb are derived from that. And also other participles and so on are derived from that. And adjectival participles, relative participle, adverbial participle, various types of, various forms of a verb. And the noun uḻḷadu, meaning what is also derived from it. There's also another verb, uḻḷu. Uḻḷu means to think. So, but many of the forms of uḻḷu are very similar to the forms of ull. Many of the verbal forms. So that is why he's in these two senses. He's using this syllable ull. In fact, almost. Yeah, that is, the Tamil verses are divided up according to the metrical feet. Every metric in this type of verse is called a vemba. It has 4 metrical feet in each of the first 3 lines, and 2.5 in the last line. So that's a total of 15 metrical feet are in this verse. And except the last one, every one of those metrical feet begins with the syllable ull. So it's a very, very skillfully composed verse. It seems to be almost like the same word is being repeated in so many different forms throughout the verse, but actually it has so much deep meaning to it. So the first 3 feet of the first line are a rhetorical question. What that rhetorical question is uḷḷadu, aladu, uḻḷa-uṇarvu, uḻḷadō. Uḻḷadu means what is, what actually exists, is the implication. Aladu is an adversative conjunction. It can either mean if not, or it can mean other than or except as. So it actually gives room for various meanings here. uḻḷa-uṇarvu. Uḻḻa, as I say, is an adjectival or relative participle from the verb ull. It can also be an adjectival participle from the verb uḻḷu. So if it's from ull, it means existing. If it's from the verb uḻḷu, it's actually the infinitive of the verb uḻḻu, so it would mean to think. So this is why various different meanings, but all complementary, compatible meanings can be drawn out of this first sentence. Uṇarvu means awareness, and uḻḷadō is an interrogative form of the third person singular form of ull. Uḻḷadu means it is. So uḻḷadu can mean what is, it can mean it is, it can mean being. So it's depending on where it occurs in the sentence. So the first uḻḷadu means what is. The uḻḷadō means is it, or does it exist. So the meaning of this sentence, if we take aladu to mean if not, and we take the uḻḷa in uḻḻa-uṇarvu to mean existing, the literal meaning of the sentence is, if what exists were not, would existing awareness exist? In other words, the implication is that we all are aware of our own being. So existing awareness implies awareness of existing, or being awareness. It implies satchit in this context. So we are all aware of existing. So if we didn't actually exist, could we be aware of existing? That is, we're all aware I am. If there were not what exists, which is I am, could we be aware I am, is the implication. But we can also draw out other meanings for it. As I say, uḻḷa-uṇarvu, we can take it as existing awareness, actual awareness, or awareness of what is. If we take it in the sense of awareness of what is, it means more or less sat-chit. So without sat, could there be sat-chit? Could there be awareness of existence without existence? That's one meaning. Another meaning is, because ḻuḷḷadu can mean except as or other than, we can, another meaning we can take for this is, other than uḷḷadu or except as uḻḷadu, does uḻḻa-uṇarvu exist? This meaning, well, what is implied by this meaning is that the awareness of existence is itself what exists. There's no awareness of existence other than what is, and what is not other than awareness of existence. So sat is chit and chit is sat is the implication. This is made very clear by Bhagavan in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyā, where he uses very much the same words, uḻḷadu and uṇarvu. So what he says in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyā is uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, uṇarvu verin uḻḷadu Nāṛvahum undipara, uṇarve namai uḻḷam undipara. The meaning of this is, uḻḷadu Nāṛa means to know uḻḷadu, to know what exists. Uṇarvu verin that what that means is, because of the non-existence of any other awareness to be aware of what is, that implies because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of or to know what exists, uḻḷadu Nāṛvahum, what exists is awareness. So according to Bhagavan, sat is chit, chit is sat. That is, what actually exists is only awareness. What is real, what actually exists is only awareness. And then he concludes this verse by saying, uṇarve namai uḻḷam. The basic meaning of this sentence is that awareness exists as we, but he has framed this sentence in a very skillful way. That is, uṇarvu means awareness. Normally, if we talk about awareness, we would refer to it as it. We would refer to it as a third person. But uṇarvu is never a third person. It's always the reality of the first person, the subject. So instead of using a third person verb along with uṇarvu, he uses a first person verb. That is, uḻḷam is a form of, that is the normal first person plural form of ul is uλλom. But a literary form of uλλom is uḻḷam. So uḻḻam means we are. But though he often referred to the reality as we, obviously the reality is one and not many. So he refers to it as we. So it is an inclusive form of the first person singular. That is, if Bhagavan had said I, that would be excluding us. It would be referring only to him, not to us. If he had said you, he would be pointing at us, and not that he's including all of us by saying we. That's why Bhagavan often used this word nam. Sometimes he used nam to refer to ego, as in the first verse of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, where he begins by saying, Namo lahum kandalal, because we see the world. Who is the we who sees the world? It is only ego. Whereas in other places, he uses nam to refer to what actually exists. In this case, nam refers to our own real nature. So the literal meaning of uṇarvu namai uḻḷam, awareness alone exists as we, but the verb exists is a first person form of the verb. It's first person plural form of the verse. So he's emphasizing here that uṇarvu is never actually an object. It's always the subject. That is why it is ourself. Or it's not even the subject. Even to say it's the subject is not correct. It is the reality of the subject. That is, uṇarvu is that which is always shining in our heart as I am. That I am is the reality of ego, which is the subject. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. But the reality of the ego is only the fundamental awareness I am. That is, even when we are mistakenly aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person, we are still aware of ourselves as I am. So the false awareness, I am this person, never wholly conceals the real awareness, I am. So that's why it's always shining as I am. So here in this verse 23, Bhagavan is emphasizing, but as I say, he's emphasizing that what exists is only awareness, and awareness is only ourself. It's nothing other than ourselves. So we alone are what exists, and we alone are awareness. So what he says in the first sentence of this verse 23 of Upadesha, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to be aware of what exists is awareness. This is the implied meaning of the second interpretation of this first sentence of the first maṅgalam verse. That is, the first interpretation is, if uḷḷadu were not, would uḷḷavuṇarvu exist? Second interpretation is, except as or other than uḷḷadu, does uḷḷavuṇarvu exist? In other words, the uḻḷavuṇarvu, the existing awareness, is nothing other than what exists. I mean, it is what exists. There's no existence other than awareness. Regarding the first meaning, if uḷḷadu were not, would uḻḷavuṇarvu exist? Here Bhagavan is asserting there is something that exists, there is something that is real. What is the evidence that something actually exists? Because there is awareness, there is an existing awareness, there's awareness there's this awareness I am. The very fact that we are aware I am means that we must be. We are aware of so many things, but all the things that we are aware of are not necessarily existing. That is, we can be aware of things that don't exist. We can see a snake where there is no snake. Where there's a rope lying on the ground, we see a snake. So we can be aware anything other than ourselves could be an illusion. It could be something other than what it seems to be. But we ourselves must exist, because if we didn't exist, we couldn't be aware of our existence. So Bhagavan is establishing here, there is something that exists. And that's what is the evidence that there's something that exists? The fact that we are aware is itself proof that that we exist, because we couldn't be aware if we didn't exist. So there is something that exists, and that something that exists is that which is aware. And what is aware is ourselves. So we ourselves are uḷḷadu, is the implication. So in this one simple question, which consists of 5 words, uḷḷadu, aladu, uḻḷa-uṇarvu, uḻḷadō, and of those 5, 2 of those 5 words actually form a compound word. So really, it's we can even reduce it down to 4 words. We can even analyze it as 4 words, but we can take it for the time being as 5 words. But in these 5 words, there's so much implication there. That is, firstly, he's establishing there is something that really exists. Why is there something that really exists? Because we're aware of existing. We couldn't be aware of our own existence if we didn't actually exist. So we ourselves are what actually exists. That's the first meaning. And this, what actually exists, except as uḷḷadu, does uḷḷanuvu exist? The second interpretation again emphasizes that uḷḷadu is nothing other than uṇarvu, awareness. And what is aware? We are aware, as he said, concluded verse 23 of Upadesha, which he composed about a year before uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. We are, that awareness exists, awareness alone exists as we. What we actually are is only that awareness, and that awareness is what actually exists. So that's the first alternative meaning. The second alternative meaning, because as I said, uḻḷa can be, we can interpret it in two ways. Either it is an adjectival participle of the verb uḻ, meaning exist, so it means existing or what exists, or that uḻḷanuvu means the existence, the awareness that exists, or the existing awareness. That's one meaning. It's also the infinitive form of the verb uḻḷu, which means to think. So another meaning of this is, other than uڵḷadu, is there awareness to think? Implying, is there any awareness to think of it? This is also a very relevant meaning, because it fits in with the question that he asks in the next sentence: how to think of it? That is, is there anything that is what can know what is only what is? It cannot be known by anything else, because anything other than what is what is not. What is not cannot know anything. So uڵḷadu is itself the awareness that knows itself. So is there any other awareness? Is there any awareness other than uڵḷadu to think of it? So, but that uڵḷadu doesn't think anything. It knows itself just by being itself, because it is awareness, and awareness always knows itself. So these are the three basic meanings we can take from this first sentence. All are very relevant in this context, and each one complements the other one, each other one. So that is the first sentence. The second sentence, as I say, is an elaboration of the first sentence of the original verse. First sentence of the original verse was uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva. How to think of the uḻḷaporuḻ, or how to meditate on the uḻḷaporuḻ. That was the original form of the sentence, but he expanded it as uḻḻaporuḻ, uḻḷalāṟa, uḻḷattē, uḻḷadāl, uḻḷameṉu, uḻļaporuļ, uḻḷaleva. That is, to this one, to this question, this one, which is a single clause, uḻḷaporuļ, uḻļaleva, he added two more clauses. The first clause is a since clause, and the second clause is means uḻḷam eṉum, means which is called uḻḷam, the heart. So the existing reality, uḻḷaporuļ, which is called heart. But the first clause is particularly important. He begins with the words uḻḷaporuļ. As I explained earlier, uḻḷaporuļ means the existing substance. It implies the actual, what actually exists, the true substance. Which is the same as what he referred to in the first sentence as uḻḷadu, is what he refers to in the second sentence as uḻḻaporuļ. So uḻḻaporuļ, uḻḷalāṟa. Uḻḷal means thinking. Aṟa means without. uḻḷattē, uḻḷadāl. Since the existing reality exists in the heart, uḻḷattē means in the heart, uḻḷalāṟa means without thinking or without thought. That is, uڵḷal is a verbal noun meaning thinking. It also, by extension, it comes to mean thought. So uḻḷalāṟa means without thought. So the implication is that the existing substance is beyond thought. No thought can touch the existing substance. That is, our mind can. The thoughts are finite, and they can only be thoughts about the finite things. Even when we say, oh, I'm thinking about the infinite, our conception of the infinite is still finite because it's just an idea. We've got an idea of infinite. We cannot know what is infinite without being that. Only the infinite knows the infinite. So that is what we actually are. So to know what is infinite, we need to be as we are. We need to be in the heart as it is. So uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷa-aṟa, uḻḷattē, uḻḷadāl means since the existing substance exists in the heart without thought, then the question can arise, okay, what is this heart in which this existing substance exists? That Bhagavan answers in the next clause, uḻḷameṉu, uḻḷaporuḻ, the existing substance, which is called the heart. So the heart is nothing but the existing substance itself. So why does he say the existing substance exists in the heart? In the heart here, what it implies, it exists within us. It's in the very core of our being, the very heart of our being. What we essentially are, that is where the existing reality is to be found. Because what we essentially are is itself the existing reality. So it exists in the heart as the heart. So the existing reality and the heart, these are terms that refer to the same thing. There is also another important meaning here. As I explained when I was talking about verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyā, the final verb in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyā is uḻḷam, which means we are. That is not the usual first person plural form of the verb ul. The usual form is ullōm. Uḻḷam is a much rarer form, and it's used more in literature. So Bhagavan uses this word uḻḷam in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyā to mean we are, except the we is awareness. That is, awareness exists as we. I mean, it's very difficult to express it because uḻḻam means we are or we exist. So as I say, he's taking the subject of that second sentence in verse 23 as awareness, but the verb is a first person form. So he's emphasizing that the awareness is never a second or third person. It's never an object. It's always the subject, or more precisely, the reality of the subject. That is, the subject is ego, the awareness I am this body. The real awareness, the true awareness that is what actually exists, is the fundamental awareness I am. So this, as I say, this uḻḷam, another meaning of uḻḻam, one meaning is heart, it also means we are. But as I say, Bhagavan often uses we as an inclusive form of I. That's rather than saying I and excluding us, to include us, he says we. So he uses we not as a plural, but because what actually exists is only one, not many. So we refers to, it's an inclusive first person form. So when he says the existing reality is called uḻḷam, we can take it uḻḻam to mean either the heart, or we can take it to mean we are. But we are here implies I am. So what is this existing substance? It is what we all call I am, what we are all aware of as I am. That is itself the existing substance. So that the question he asks is, since that reality exists beyond, in the heart, beyond thought, that thoughts are concerned only with phenomena. We can think about things other than ourselves, but what lies deep within our own heart cannot be reached by thought, because thoughts are finite, and they can only be thoughts about finite things. So that we cannot ever form a thought about what is infinite. That's why the very meaning of this question, uḻḷaporuḻ, uḻḷaleva, who can think about that? How can we possibly think about Brahman? If we think about Brahman, what are we thinking about? We are simply thinking about an idea of Brahman. We are not thinking about Brahman itself. So how to meditate on Brahman itself? That is the question Bhagavan is asking here. We can meditate on Brahman itself only by being as it is. Because what is Brahman? Brahman is, we ourselves are Brahman. That is uḻḷadu or uḻḷaporuḻ is another way of referring to Brahman, which is, there is no Brahman other than ourselves. Tattvamasi, you yourself are that. Right? Why do the Mahavakyas say Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Atma Brahman, Prajnanam Brahman? Tattvamasi means you are that, you yourself are that. Aham Brahmasmi means I am Brahman. I am Atma Brahma means this self, this very self is Brahman. Not any other self, this self, I myself am Brahman is what it implies. And Prajnanam means awareness. What awareness is? Prajnanam Brahman means awareness is Brahman. What awareness is Brahman? This awareness, I myself am Brahman. So all the Mahavakyas are intended to turn our attention away from the idea of Brahman back towards the reality of Brahman. The reality of Brahman is that which is always shining in our heart as I. We ourselves are Brahman. So how can we meditate on Brahman? We can meditate on Brahman only by being in the heart as it is. Only by being Brahman can we know Brahman. And how Bhagavan says, as it is, uḻḷapaḍi. How is it? It exists in the heart beyond thought. So by thinking we cannot know Brahman, only by being in the heart without thought is the implication. How can we be in the heart without thought? So long as we allow our attention to move away from ourselves towards anything else, the attention we pay to anything other than ourselves is a thought. The attention we pay to ourselves is not a thought, because thoughts are mental activity. Attending to ourselves is not a thought. It is not a mental activity. It is a cessation, a subsidence of mental activity. So it's only by attending to ourselves and thereby being what we actually are, which is that pure being awareness, that uḻḷa-v-uṇarvu, the existing awareness, Satchit, which is what is always shining in us as I, only by being that as it is, without thought, that is truly meditating on Brahman. So we cannot meditate on Brahman by thought. We can meditate on Brahman only by being Brahman, is the implication of this verse. So this is such a deep, it has such a deep meaning. Bhagavan, Lakshman Sharma requested Bhagavan to translate uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit, as he had done for Upadesha Undiyā. Bhagavan declined. And Bhagavan said to Lakshman Sharma, oh, you've studied more Sanskrit than me. You know Sanskrit better than I do, so you can you can translate it. So Lakshman Sharma, when he started to translate uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit with Bhagavan's help, he first tried to compose it in Bemba meter. That is, Bhagavan had told, there was a story that Bhagavan often told, but when Bhagavan was living on the hill, one day Kavyaganta, who was a very proficient poet in Sanskrit, but he earned the title Kavyaganta. Kavyaganta means one whose throat is poetry, because he was such a skillful extempore poet in Sanskrit. He actually underwent a test in a gathering of scholars, and they gave him this title because of his ability to compose his ability in Sanskrit and as a poet. So one day Kavyaganta was talking about the greatness of Sanskrit poetry, saying there's no poetry in the world that can compare with Sanskrit. There are so many great meters, and it is such a... He was praising the Sanskrit Sanskrit prosody. So Bhagavan was listening patiently. Then Bhagavan asked him, in Tamil we have a meter, Bemba. Do you have any such meter? And he said, what is this Vemba? Then Bhagavan explained to him the rules of Vemba. They're actually very intricate rules. But the Tamil prosody is actually extremely sophisticated. But Vemba, then means vel. Vel means for white or plain or very simple. It's considered a very simple verse. No poet can be considered a poet in Tamil unless they can compose Vembas. Vemba is the basic benchmark. If you can't compose Vembas, you're not a poet. If you can compose Vembas, okay, you're qualified to be a poet. So it is even more sophisticated, even more complex meters in Tamil. But Vemba is a very special meter in Tamil, and a lot of Tamil literature has been written in Vemba, and a lot of Bhagavan wrote a lot of his works in Vemba, including a lot of the works that he translated, Bhagavad Gita Saram, Anma Bodham, Devikalotram, Atma Sakshakara Prakanam. These Bhagavan composed all of them in Vemba. So it's a very favorite meter for all Tamil poets, and it's considered, as I say, it's considered the benchmark for Tamil poetry. First, to be a Tamil poet, first you have to be able to compose Vemba. So Bhagavan explained this to Kaviyaganta and said, "Do you have any such meter in Sanskrit?" And Kaviyaganta said, "No, we don't have any such verses in Sanskrit." Then Bhagavan said, "Well, can you compose such a verse in Sanskrit?" And Kaviyaganta tried. He tried several times and struggled, and he couldn't compose a verse in Sanskrit. Then Bhagavan said, "Okay, at least in your mother tongue, Telugu, can you compose one in Telugu?" And Kaviyaganta struggled, and he couldn't do so. I think Bhagavan was trying to put down his pride in his great ability in Sanskrit, and thinking that therefore Sanskrit is the greatest of all, Sanskrit poetry is the greatest poetry in the world. To put down his pride, Bhagavan did this. So Bhagavan often used to tell this story. So since Bhagavan told this story to Lakshman Sharma, that is what happened when Lakshman Sharma came to Bhagavan, at about the time, but I think he first came to Bhagavan in 1928. So at about the time that Bhagavan composed uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, Lakshman Sharma came to him. So shortly after Lakshman Sharma first came to Bhagavan, Bhagavan asked him, "Have you read uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu?" And he said no, because though I'm a Tamilian, I'm a Sanskrit student, because in those days, under British rule in India, in the 1830s or so, they introduced a new education policy. That is, there was a person called Lord Macaulay who introduced an education policy in India. Actually, in the 1830s in India, the literacy rate in India was far higher than the literacy rate in England. So, but they, on the pretext of educating the Indian masses, they introduced this education policy. But the aim of the education policy was to train Indians to act as civil servants, to work under the British in the Indian civil service. And for that, they needed educated Indians to know English and to be proficient in English, because they wanted to. It was convenient it's much easier for the British to administer the government in India in English medium than in any local language, because then British people who went to India, they did tend to learn their local language, because if they were, for example, collectors or so on, they had to communicate with people. But the main language of government was English. So in order to establish English as a language of government, they needed a class of educated Indians who would be proficient in English. And they wanted to give prominence to English. And also it was an opportunity, that is one of the how just a few thousand British were able to rule over so many millions of people in India, it was by a divide and rule policy. So this education policy also served their divide and rule policy. So part of this education policy was that the first language, or the primary language of instruction in all schools, should be English. And students could then, in addition to English, they could study either their mother tongue or Sanskrit. This had the effect. Previous to that, all educated Indians would know their mother tongue and Sanskrit. So, for example, anyone who is well in Tamil Nadu, for example, where the local language is Tamil, most educated people would be proficient in both Sanskrit and Tamil. So that's why there was such a rich blending of Sanskrit vocabulary in Tamil literature. But after this education policy was introduced, at school people would learn English plus either Tamil or Sanskrit if they lived in Tamil Nadu, or whatever state they lived in. It would either be the local language or Sanskrit. They had that choice. Generally, Brahmins opted to study Sanskrit, and non-Brahmins opted to study their mother tongue. So this had an effect of dividing of creating a division among the castes, and a division that wasn't there previously. In other words, they were trying to divide the castes. So by creating lots of divisions in society, by emphasizing the division between Muslims and Hindus, they're emphasizing the division between the Hindu castes, and emphasizing the division between different languages in India. They were trying to divide the people of India so they could administer. This is all history. Sorry, it's not so relevant to this subject, but this is why many educated Tamilians would know either Sanskrit or Tamil. They wouldn't know both. Some knew both, like Murugan knew both, but Murugan was unusual because though he was a Brahmin, he opted to study Tamil. He was a great scholar in Tamil, and a number of Brahmins of his generation, who later became great Tamil scholars, they did this likewise. They also privately studied Sanskrit, but at school they studied, their main subject was Tamil. That's why Murugan was so proficient. I mean, it wasn't that reason, but because he was passionate about the Sanskrit, the Tamil language, he became so proficient, and he also learned Sanskrit on the side. But many Tamilians, for them, Sanskrit became whereas previously educated Tamilians would know Sanskrit. For those who opted to learn Tamil at school, in other words, most of the non-Brahmins, Sanskrit became an alien language to them. And for those who opted to study Sanskrit, though Tamil was their mother tongue, literary Tamil became alien to them. So when Bhagavan asked Lakshman Sharma, "Have you read Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu?" he said, "No. I'm a Sanskrit student, so I'm not able to understand it." So though he's a Tamilian, he's not able to understand literary Tamil. But then he thought to himself, this is a very good opportunity. Bhagavan himself has asked me whether I've read Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, so why don't I take this opportunity? So he said to Bhagavan, "No, Bhagavan, I haven't read it. I'm not able to understand it because I'm a Sanskrit student. But if Bhagavan would like to teach me, I would very much like to study it." So Bhagavan began to explain to him in detail the meaning of the verses. Lakshman Sharma, because of his love of Sanskrit, he then asked Bhagavan to compose a Sanskrit translation. Bhagavan declined and said, no, you compose your own translation. But because Bhagavan had told him this incident about Kavya Ganta being unable to compose Vemba, Lakshman Sharma tried to see if he could compose if he could compose a Sanskrit Bemba, his idea was if he struggled, Bhagavan would then step in, and then maybe that in that way he could get Bhagavan to translate it. That was his hope. So anyway, he struggled. He tried to compose the first verse in Sanskrit, and however much he tried, he couldn't succeed, which is not surprising when even the great Kavyaganta, who was supposed to be one of the greatest Sanskrit poets of his generation, even he couldn't compose Bemba. Lakshman Sharma obviously wasn't as proficient in Sanskrit as Kavyaganta, so he also couldn't. So then Bhagavan, because he was struggling to compose it in Bemba, Bhagavan himself wrote a Sanskrit, translated this first maṅgalam verse into Sanskrit. Lakshman Sharma was overjoyed, and he then asked Bhagavan, please compose all the verses of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu in the same way, in Bemba meter. And Bhagavan again declined. He said, no. You can do it. You can compose yourself. And then there was a long story to it. Lakshman Sharma composed it in one form, but he wasn't satisfied, and then he went over it again and again with Bhagavan. And finally, at a certain stage in the composition, they had called this work Satdarshanam. That was the original name of Lakshman Sharma's translation, but he had done with Bhagavan's help. Then one day, when Kapali Sastri, who was a disciple of Kavyaganta, but who was living in Aurobindo ashram and was also a devotee of Aurobindo and the French mother, he visited the ashram. So some other followers of Kavyaganta told him, but Lakshman Sharma is translating uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu into Sanskrit. So Kapali Sastri asked if he could see the Sanskrit translation. So Bhagavan said to Lakshman Sharma, okay, give him a copy. So Lakshman Sharma gave him a copy, and he said, I have to show this to Kavyaganta because he's more proficient in Sanskrit than me. I'm on my way now to Sirsi, where by that time Kavyaganta had left Bhagavan and was living in a place in Karnataka. So he was, Kapali Sastri was going there, so he said he would take this and show to Kavyaganta. And he duly took it to Kavyaganta, and a week or so later, a letter was received from Kavyaganta addressed to Bhagavan with a completely new Sanskrit translation of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, in which and a letter. In the letter he wrote to Bhagavan, perceiving my restriction, the restriction of my hand to correct Lakshman Sharma's version, I have translated my own version. How did he translate it when he doesn't know Tamil so well? Because Vishwanatha Swami was there, and Vishwanatha Swami knew Tamil well, so he explained the meaning, and Kavyaganta translated it according to their own ideas. It's not Satdarshana is not at all an accurate translation of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. But when Lakshman Sharma saw this Sanskrit translation, it's written in very beautiful Sanskrit, far better verses than he could compose. He said to Bhagavan, this is just what I wanted. This is a very nice translation. I will take this and use it for my daily parayana. And Bhagavan at once said, no, begin a new version in a longer meter. And then Bhagavan pointed out to him how they had twisted the meaning in so many places, and how it wasn't at all representative of the correct meaning of the Tamil. Bhagavan explained in detail. Another thing Kavyaganta wrote in that letter to Bhagavan is, please ask the manager of the ashram not to print this until my disciple Kapali has finished writing his commentary. So this, even before Bhagavan had seen Satdarshan, this translation, he took for granted, but this would be approved. Kavyaganta took for granted that this would be the approved translation, and that the ashram would want to publish it, and he therefore requested them not to publish it before his disciple had written a commentary. So, as I say, when Lakshman Sharma wanted to take Kavyagantha's version for his Parayana, Bhagavan said no. And then Bhagavan explained to him in detail how Satdarshana does not faithfully convey the meaning of the Tamil, how the meaning is in so many ways twisted and distorted in the Sanskrit version. So Lakshmana Sharma then started to write in a longer meter. So as I say, there's a long history to that. And later when Satdarshan Bhashya was published, it was not published by the ashram not only in Sanskrit, but also Kapali Sastri translated it into English, and Vishwanatha Swami translated it into Tamil. So in all three languages, Tamil, Sanskrit, well, the original was Sanskrit, and Tamil and English were all published by the ashram. But when Lakshmana Sharma went through it, because Bhagavan had explained to him the meaning of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he had a pretty good understanding of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, and he found Satdarshan Bhashya is going quite against the actual meaning of uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. For example, in one place, Kapali Sastri, in his introduction, he had written, it is therefore false and futile to say that Brahman alone is real and that the world is unreal. That is, his argument was, but if you have a clay pot, the substantial truth of the pot is K, and the formal truth of the pot is the pot. So both the pot and the clay are real. Whereas according to Bhagavan, when Bhagavan used that analogy of golden ornaments in verse 13, he said the gold is real, the ornaments are unreal. In other words, the substance is real, the form is unreal. So the same would apply to the clay and pot analogy. The pot is real as clay. As a pot, it is unreal. But they twisted that, and when they translated that verse 13, they completely omitted the words which Bhagavan repeated several times of real and unreal. They completely omitted the word unreal because they didn't want to admit that the world of names and forms was unreal. So Bhagavan teaches us that substance alone is real, the form is unreal. But Kapali Sastri wrote, it is false and futile to say that Brahman alone is real and the world is unreal. In other words, he's arguing directly against Advaita, against Bhagavan's teachings, but trying to pass it off as Bhagavan's teaching. So Lakshmana Sharma was much upset about this. He said to Bhagavan, if you allow this to be published by your ashram in your lifetime, will not people in future think that you have approved this? Then Bhagavan said, according to the purity of the antakarana, the inner instrument, meaning the mind and will and so on, according to the purity of the antakarana, the same teaching reflects in different ways. If you think you can give a better commentary, you write your own commentary. And that's what prompted Lakshmana Sharma to write his Tamil commentary on uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, and also his English book, Mahayoga. Because he took that as Bhagavan's blessing, but he should try to present his understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, which obviously is far, far closer to the real meaning of Bhagavan's teachings than Satdarshan Bhashya. And later, when the ashram refused to publish Lakshmana Sharma's commentary, because they weren't very happy with him because he had started by publishing it himself, Bhagavan one day stood outside the window behind the window of the ashram office, just behind Chinnaswami's desk. Bhagavan just stood there quietly. And Chinnaswami was sitting at his desk. He didn't notice Bhagavan standing just behind him outside the window. And then someone else in the office noticed and said, Swami, Bhagavan. He indicated that Bhagavan was just outside the window. So Chinnaswami stood up. He was terrified of Bhagavan, and he said, Bhagavan, what is it? And Bhagavan said, Pichan. He always that is when Chinnaswami was a small boy, his pet name in the family was Pichan. So Bhagavan said, Pichan, everyone is saying that Lakshmana Sharma's commentary is the best. why don't you publish it, or something like that. Bhagavan didn't say publish it. He just put it as a question. Why don't you publish it? As if it's a suggestion. And immediately, Chinnaswamy didn't want to displease Bhagavan, so he immediately asked Lakshman Sharma to give all the books that he had printed, and he pasted over the original. It was Lakshman Sharma had his own publishing house in Pudukkottai, so it was put as New Light Publishing House with the publisher. Over that, it was slips of paper were pasted saying, published by the Sabbatikari of Ramanashram. So that's how Lakshman Sharma's Tamil commentary in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu eventually became ashram publications due to the intervention of Bhagavan. But anyway, that's all old history. But anyway, I just mentioned that because it's all relevant to this. I mean, it's all indirectly relevant to this. So anyway, why I brought up this subject is that this is Bhagavan wrote this Sanskrit verse, which not many people know about, unfortunately, which is a perfect translation of the Tamil verse. So I just wanted to go over this Sanskrit verse. What Bhagavan says in Sanskrit is, Sadvina sadnyanam asti kimu satyam vritti rahitam shridi vibhati ataha tatridayam jayati katam shridita tadatma Bhava stitihi dhyanam satvastuna syat. What that means is, it starts with a question. Sadvina sadnyanam asti kimu. That means without sat, could satnyanam exist? So could there be awareness of sat, or could there be an aware? Yes, could there be awareness of existence if there wasn't existence? So this is an almost exact translation of the first interpretation of the first sentence in Tamil. Uḷḷadu uḻḷavuṇarvu uḻḷadō became Sadvina Sadnyanam Asti Kimu. So it's an almost exact translation. And then the second sentence is Satyam Vritti Rahitam Shridi Vibhati. That is what is one sentence. The second sentence in Tamil is split into two sentences in Sanskrit. As far as I understand the Sanskrit, that is Satyam Vritti Rahitam Shridi Vibhati, means the reality shines in the heart, free of thought. Ataha tat hridayam, that the heart, jayati katam, who can meditate on that the heart. Ataha means therefore. Therefore, how to meditate, not who can, but how to. Katam means how. How to meditate on it, the heart. How to meditate on that, the heart. That refers to the Satyam. So it's very, very close to Tamil, where Bhagavan in Tamil said, uḻḷameṉu muḻḷaporu, the reality, the existing substance which is called the heart. In Sanskrit, he says, that the heart. So how to meditate on that, the heart. And then the answer is, Shridi tadatma bhava stitihi dhyanam satvastunaha. That means, Shridi means in the heart, tadatma bhava means as it is, stiti means standing or being established, or it implies being in the heart as it is. Dhyanam satvastunaha is meditation on the satvastu. And he ends with the word syat, means may you be. It implies may that is to meditate. The meditation or contemplation on the satvastu is nothing but being in the heart as it is. May you be thus is the implication. So this is the first and possibly the only Vemba that has ever been composed in Sanskrit, and it is an almost perfect translation of the Tamil original. So that shows Bhagavan's skill in Sanskrit poetry. But what this meter, but not even Kavyaganta could compose, Bhagavan composed so easily. And later, when Bhagavan was referring to the same story, many, many years later, that was in 1946, so that's 18 years later, one day he had told this story, and he had told that how he had asked Kavyaganta, when Kavyaganta was unable to compose a Vemba in Sanskrit, Bhagavan then asked him, well, can you do it in your mother tongue, Telugu? So when Suri Nagama heard this, she asked Bhagavan to compose Vemba in Telugu. At first, Bhagavan declined, but later he composed in Telugu and Tamil, Ekama Panchakam. So that was the context for, that story of Kavyaganta's inability to compose Vemba was the context in which Bhagavan wrote the Sanskrit Vemba, and he wrote the Telugu Vembas for Ekama Panchakam. Sorry, I've gone into a lot of storytelling today, which may not be entirely relevant, but it's well, it is relevant in a way, but not wholly relevant. But the main point is this verse. What Bhagavan is emphasizing in this verse is we cannot meditate on what actually exists by thinking. We can meditate on it only by being as it is. And how can we be as it is? Because we are that. If the reality was something other than ourselves, we couldn't be as it is. In order to be as it is, that must be what we actually are. So being as we actually are, that is meditating on the reality. And how can we be as we actually are? So long as we're attending to anything else, we're rising as ego. This is what Bhagavan makes clear in the later parts of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So in order to be as it is, we need to attend only to ourselves. So here in this verse, Bhagavan is giving us very deep and practical clues about the nature. What is Atma Vichara? What we are investigating, the Atma we are investigating, we ourselves whom we are investigating, is what actually exists and what is always aware of its own existence. In other words, that fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am, that is uḷḷadu and that is uṇarvu. That is what we actually are. That is Satchit. So how to meditate on that? We can't meditate on it as an object. We can only be as it is, and we can be as it is only by attending to it. By attending to this fundamental awareness, I am, ego subsides and we remain as we actually are. That is true meditation on Brahman. So Bhagavan is here emphasizing that is what is unique about Bhagavan's teachings. Some people say, oh, Bhagavan hasn't brought anything new. It's all there. It's all in the old text. Yes, in a sense, it is all there in the old text. But the practical implication of what was there in all the old texts was by and large completely missed. Bhagavan came to emphasize, to highlight, to point out and to highlight the practical implication of all that is said in the Prasthana Traya, the triple source of Vedanta, the Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, and Bhagavad Gita. We don't need to study all these texts. We need to understand what is the practical implication. That is the essence of all these texts is the Mahavakyas. And the Mahavakyas say, you are that. So what is the practical implication? Stop thinking about Brahman. Stop thinking about anything other than yourself. You yourself are that, so think only of yourself. How can we think of ourselves? Only by attending to ourselves. And by attending to ourselves, we are not thinking of ourselves as an object. We are attending only to ourselves. So by attending to ourselves, we are just being ourselves. And by being ourselves, being as we actually are, that is meditating on the reality. So this verse exemplifies how Bhagavan is. The whole emphasis of Bhagavan's teachings is on the practical implication of Vedanta, of all the ancient Advaitic texts. firstly, what is really relevant, because there's a lot in Advaitic text which is unnecessary for us. Our aim is just to know who am I. We don't need to, there's a lot of information in old texts and commentaries and so on, which we don't know. That is, we don't need to know, because that is, those texts were written at a time when Indian philosophy was thriving and there were so many competing systems of philosophy. You had to defend your system of philosophy against others, which means you had to give arguments that would satisfy others. So the whole thing became far more complex than is necessary for a true spiritual aspirant. Our aim is not to argue against any other systems of philosophy. The whole aim of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, as Bhagavan makes clear in verses 2 and 3, the aim of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is not to argue about it. The aim is just to be without rising as ego. As he says in verse 2, for example, he concludes by saying, all arguments are possible only so long as ego exists. Therefore, literally what he means, he says is, yang ketu tannileel nitral tale. That means I perishing, standing in the state of oneself is best. What that means is, the best option is not to rise as ego to engage in any arguments about different systems of philosophy. The best is to turn within. Well, he doesn't say turn within, but we have to understand that, to turn within, thereby bring about the dissolution of I, and thereby standing in the state of oneself. That means being as we actually are. That is best. So Bhagavan is against all arguments. Arguments are necessary. Arguments in the sense of philosophical arguments are necessary to convince ourselves, for us to understand the reason why we should accept what Bhagavan has taught us. Philosophy is useful for that. Philosophy is not for going and quarreling with others, because others will have other views. Not everyone people believe what they want to believe. They will find justification for whatever they want to believe. So our aim is not to convince those who don't want to be convinced. Our aim is to convince ourselves and to put it into practice. So that is the purpose of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So likewise, in verse 3, he ends by saying, uḷḷahu vitu, leaving the world. That means not attending to the world. Instead of arguing about, in order to argue about the world, in order to argue about whether the world is real or a false appearance, whether it's knowledge or not, whether it's happiness or not, to argue about all these things, we need to attend to the world. That is not the aim of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That is not the aim of Advaita. The aim of Advaita, the world is unreal, so forget the world, leave the world. So withdraw from the world, uḷḷahu vitu, leaving the world, tanne ondu, knowing oneself. Ondru irendu tanatru, being without one and two. That means being without this duality of duality and non-duality is itself it's a pair of opposites, duality and non-duality. So even this pair of opposites, we should not be concerned about. Let it be duality or non-duality. Who am I? That's what we need to know. So Bhagavan is emphasizing. He's not saying that we shouldn't understand, but the world is, it's necessary for us to understand, but the world is an unreal appearance. But we are not to argue about it. Having understood it's an unreal appearance, we should leave the world. We should tanne ondu. It can mean knowing oneself. It also means investigating oneself. So leaving the world, investigating oneself, thereby being free from bringing about the cessation of the distinction between duality and non-duality. Ondru irendu tanatru, nanatra annile elakum opuam. That state in which I has perished is agreeable to all. That is the aim of Bhagavan's teaching. So Bhagavan's teachings are all about practice. So Bhagavan's what is unique about Bhagavan's teachings is firstly the emphasis that he put on practice. Secondly, how to clarify. In order to clarify what the practice is, he presented Advaita in a very radical and simple manner. One thing that Bhagavan has highlighted throughout his teaching, but particularly in uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, is the nature of ego. According to, in all the ancient texts, it is said the problem is avidya. We don't, that is, if we knew ourselves as we actually are, we wouldn't be aware of all these things. We wouldn't rise as ego, and consequently wouldn't be aware of all these things. So it's our ignorance of our real nature is the cause of all problems. Bhagavan agrees, but Bhagavan points out, what is that avidya? What is that ignorance, that ajnana? It's nothing but ego itself. In the maṅgalam verse he wrote for his Tamil translation of Vivekachudamani, he begins by saying in the first line of the maṅgalam verse he wrote for that, aham eṇum mūla avidya ahandrida, to get rid of the primal ignorance called I. In other words, ego itself is what is called avidya is nothing but ego. And he also says it very explicitly in the first subsection of the first section of Vichara Sangraham. This is this one paragraph in Vichara Sangraham is without question the most important paragraph in Vichara Sangraham, and it is the paragraph that most closely represents the real teachings of Bhagavan, because a lot of what's in Vichara Sangraham is not actually Bhagavan's teachings. It's Bhagavan's Tamil explanations of what was written in other books that he was asked to explain. But this paragraph represents the real teachings of Bhagavan. In this paragraph, he says, Ipadi, in this way, dehate kuritu, referring to the body, abar antaramai, that means being intermediate, he's here talking about ego, being intermediate, nan eṇum bodhame, that awareness that rises as I, referring to the body, and being intermediate means it is neither the pure awareness, it's neither Sat-Chit, nor is it the body. It is that which rises in between, as Bhagavan says in verse 24 of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. That's what he's indicating by that word avantaramai, which means being intermediate. That's what he's referring to. It's neither Sat-Chit nor is it the body. It's something that rises in between. So that awareness of but rises as I, referring to the body. In other words, the false awareness I am this body itself is tat-bodha, which is a technical term that's used in some Tamil Advaitic texts to mean ego. Tat-bodham eṇum, ahankaram eṇum, ego, it's called tat-bodha, it's called ahankara, avidya, it's called avidya, maya eṇum, it's also called maya, malam eṇum, it's called impurity, jiva eṇum, it's called jiva, palavidamai solapadakinju. So what is described in so many ways as tat-bodha, as ego, as avidya, as maya, as malam, and jivan is nothing but that false awareness, I am this body. In other words, ego is itself avidya. So this is something that is unique about Bhagavan's teaching. The emphasis he puts, rather than putting emphasis on avidya, he puts emphasis on ego. Because what is ego? Ego is nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. Awareness of ourselves is something other than what we actually are. So that is ignorance. We are never actually ignorant. We always know I am. But instead of knowing I am as it actually is, we know it as I am this body. So though we always know ourselves, we know ourselves wrongly. We know ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So that which knows itself as I am this body, that is ego, that is avidya, that is maya. So Bhagavan puts all the focus on ego, and then he reveals what is the nature of ego. In verse 25 of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says it's a formless phantom. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. And it's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. It borrows its form from a body, it borrows its substance from Sat-Chit. But it itself has neither form nor substance, so it doesn't actually exist at all. But how did this formless phantom come into existence? Urupatriyundam, grasping form, it comes into existence. Urupatri nikkum, grasping form, it stands. Urupatri undu mikaongum, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Uruvittu urupatram, leaving form, it grasps form. Therefore, the very nature of ego is grasping form. What is meant by form? Form is anything other than ego, because ego is a formless phantom, so all forms are other than ego. And forms, as Bhagavan says, forms are unreal. What is real is only the substance. So the ego is, as ego, we are constantly grasping things other than ourselves, which are all just form, phenomena, things other than ourselves, they're unreal. But Tedinal autum pidicum. It's sought, it takes flight. So what is the implication of this? The nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by grasping things other than itself. In other words, by attending to and being aware of things other than itself, including this body, but it takes itself to be. This is all other than itself. All forms are other than ego. But if instead of grasping any form, if ego tries to grasp itself, in other words, if it tries to attend to itself, if it tries to investigate itself, autum pidicum, it will take flight. Taking flight is a metaphorical way of saying it will subside and dissolve back into its source. This is something that, to the best of my knowledge, has not been revealed so clearly in any of the ancient texts. And this is a vital clue for the practice. Some people, they ask Bhagavan, you say that we have to investigate who am I? What is the I we have to investigate? Is it ego or is it the self? Is it our Brahman? Is it our real nature? When people ask such questions, Bhagavan said, it's sufficient you investigate ego, because there are not two eyes, there's only one eye. That one eye now seems to be ego because it's aware of itself as I am this body. If we investigate this one eye, we will find that it was never ego, it was always just pure awareness, which was never aware of anything other than itself. So long as you mistake what is lying on the ground to be a snake, you're told, look at the snake very carefully. If you look at the snake very carefully, what do you see? Oh, there's no snake at all. It's just a rope. So likewise, if we look at ego very carefully, we will see there's no such thing as ego at all. Because what seems to be ego is only pure awareness, which is what we actually are. So what seems to be ego is Brahman. So if you want to know Brahman, look carefully at ego. If you look carefully at ego will subside and Brahman alone will remain. If you look carefully at the snake will disappear and the rope alone will remain. So Bhagavan's teachings are so practical. So it is so fitting that in the very first maṅgalam verse of uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he talks wholly about the practice. That is what uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is all about. He's making it clear here. But the subject he's talking about is only this, is only knowing and being what we actually are. Who am I? That is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana
Ramana.
Sorry, I've gone way over time. So.
No, that's all right. So just that some may wonder why you talked a lot about those translation and all those story about Kapala Shastra and so forth. And I think it's very important for everyone to understand the inadequacies of the Sanskrit version.
Yeah.
It is only that first verse that Bhagavan himself translated, and others were not. And so then we need to take that with a pinch of salt. And the second point is,
if we want to understand, if we want to understand Bhagavan correctly, we have to go to the original.
Right. And then the second point that you mentioned is about Kapala Shastri. I think I'm sorry to be not diplomatic, but I think it's better to stay away from Kapala Shastri's commentary. So, I mean, that is the truth, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you want to,
I mean, he literally says it is false and futile to say that Brahman alone is real and the world is unreal. That is precisely what Bhagavan doesn't say it in quite those words, but that's exactly what Bhagavan implies in uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Right. So there are just a couple of questions, and I will just close at that, and then we'll just have a small section next. So the first question is, how is it known that awareness is fundamental? When practicing self-inquiry and coming to silence, there is not the experience of anything but silence.
Our own experience makes it clear. It should be clear to all of us that awareness is fundamental. Could we know anything? Could there be any experience, any awareness of anything, if it was not for awareness? If we were not aware, we wouldn't know anything. But that is, there would be no science if there wasn't awareness. But science is giving so much reality to what is known, and it's overlooking what knows it. Nowadays, they are also trying to study consciousness or awareness, but even because science is all about objectively studying things, they're trying to objectively study consciousness. But consciousness is not an object. What that is, they talk about mental states and states of consciousness and experience. Many modern neuroscientists say consciousness is nothing but experience. But what is experience? Experience is what we know. Consciousness is, they fail to make that the fundamental distinction of drisya viveka. They fail to distinguish the knower from the known, the seer from the seen. Consciousness is that which knows. All these qualia and so many things, I mean, with these modern philosophers and modern neuroscientists and psychologists and everything, when they're trying to understand consciousness, they're only talking about experiences, what we are conscious of. But you're missing the point. So long as you're attending to any object, that is not consciousness. What is it that knows that? To whom does this appear? That is the question they should be asking. That is the question Bhagavan tells us to ask, but they fail to ask. So all our experience is based on awareness. There couldn't be any experience without awareness. So the very fact that we are aware of anything shows that awareness is fundamental. So we are aware of the world. What does that show? Does it show that the world exists or that awareness exists? The world could be an illusion, but we couldn't be aware of the world, whether it's real or illusory. We couldn't be aware of it if we were not aware. So the appearance of the world proves only one thing. It proves the existence of awareness. So we don't need any proof for awareness. Even when we don't see the world. In sleep, we don't see the world, but I slept. We're aware of our having been in a state in which we were not aware of anything. So awareness continues even in the absence of awareness of things. Awareness of things other than ourselves is what Bhagavan calls sutarivu, or we can say in English, transitive awareness, awareness of things. The real awareness, but that awareness of things appears and disappears. In waking and dream, we're aware of things. In sleep, we're not aware of anything, but we are still aware. So the awareness of things is transitive awareness, sutarivu. That appears and disappears. So that is not real. The real awareness is only the fundamental awareness. We could not be aware of anything if we were not aware. But we can be aware even when we're not aware of anything. That of anything means of anything other than ourselves. We are always aware of ourselves. Even in sleep, when we're aware of nothing else, we are aware I am. We're aware of our own existence. Our own existence obviously is not an object of awareness. That's why rather than saying aware of I am, I just say we're aware I am. That is, there's no object of awareness there, but awareness still shines. So awareness is Swayam Prakasha, it's shining by its own light. And we ourselves are that. So how can we doubt that awareness is fundamental? It is so obviously fundamental. And anyone who is denying that awareness is fundamental, they are like someone who is searching for their glasses, when their glasses are on their very nose itself. They are overlooking what's on their nose, and they're looking out there for where are the glasses. Likewise, these people, they're overlooking the awareness that they themselves actually are, and they're looking for, trying to find where in the brain, or what neural correlates are there of consciousness. They're looking outside for consciousness instead of looking within.
Thank you, Michael. So there's another question. What should we do when we are slacking in our attention to ourselves and more turn towards objects? I lack the strength to turn within and feel more inclined to go after sense objects.
Right. Okay. You yourself have answered. You feel more inclined to go after sense objects. The strength that we lack is the strength of inclination. We have more inclination to attend to other things than we have to attend to ourselves. That is the problem. The inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves is what is called Vishaya Vasana. That's why Bhagavan, the Vishaya Vasanas are the problem we're up against. The inclination to attend only to ourselves, to our own being, is called Sat Vasana. So in order to strengthen the inclination to attend to ourselves and weaken the inclination to attend to other things, the only way is to try to attend to ourselves. By patient and persistent practice, we will slowly wean our mind off its inclination to attend to other things and strengthen that inclination, that love, to know ourselves as we actually are. So practice, that is why Bhagavan always insisted there is no shortcut. This practice of self-investigation, practice of self-attentiveness is absolutely essential. We just have to continue trying. Doesn't matter. Don't be disheartened by failure. However many times you fail, you're still moving in the right direction, because you can't fail without trying. So we should welcome failure, because at least it's better to try and to fail than not to try at all. And if we do try, doesn't matter how many times we fail, eventually we will succeed. So let us try more and more to be self-attentive. Yes, sometimes the strength of our inclination to go outward seems insurmountable. Okay, but if your attention wants to go outwards, what should you think about? Think about Bhagavan. Think about his teachings. They will encourage you to turn back within.